All right, let's jump right in. We're doing a deep dive today into the world of Christian dioceses in 2024. And you sent over this really amazing blog called Union Between Christians.
Yeah.
And it's not just like a simple list or anything. It's packed with links to denomination, councils, and even like specific dioceses across the globe.
It really is like someone meticulously mapped out
Yeah.
the Christian world.
It is. We're talking about a breakdown by continent, by country, even by year 2024 specifically, so we can really get like a snapshot of Christianity as it stands today.
Absolutely.
But before we get lost in the specifics, let's set the stage, I guess.
Okay.
The blog starts with the basics, the three main branches of Christianity: Catholic, Orthodox,
Right.
and Protestant.
And it might sound familiar, but each one of those branches is really more like a tree in itself.
Okay.
With tons of little branches and sub-branches.
So walk me through that.
Sure.
So we've got Catholic, and then what's beyond that?
So you've got the Latin Church, which is probably what most people think of when they hear Catholic.
Right.
But then you also have the Eastern Catholic churches,
Okay.
which have their own unique traditions and liturgies. So a really interesting blend of Eastern and Western Christian practices.
And then there's Orthodox, which, if I'm remembering correctly, gets even more complex.
You're right. We've got the Oriental Orthodox and the Eastern Orthodox branches.
Okay.
And just to kind of simplify it a little bit, the split happened centuries ago over really subtle theological differences. And they've evolved with kind of distinct practices and leadership structures since then.
So Catholic, Orthodox, and then there's the Protestant branch.
Right.
Which feels like it just explodes into a million different denominations.
It's remarkable, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
you've got Anglicanism, Lutheranism, Baptists, Pentecostals, and each one with its own sort of interpretation
Right.
of Scripture and ways of practicing faith.
So it highlights just how much faith can change and diversify over time across culture.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, the blog doesn't just like lay out these branches, it maps them geographically.
Exactly.
Right.
The blog owner has created these really interesting entries like Christianity in Northern America 2024
Okay.
or Christianity in Europe 2024 to really give us a visual sense of how these
Cool.
different branches are distributed around the world.
When we're looking at this map, what kind of patterns jump out at you?
Well, let's take Africa, for example.
Okay.
We see a real concentration of Anglican dioceses there.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a direct legacy of British colonialism.
Right.
You know, think about places like the Anglican Lagos Diocese in Nigeria or the Anglican All Saints Cathedral Diocese in Kenya.
That makes sense considering the history of those regions, for sure.
Yeah.
What about somewhere like Australia? What jumps out there?
Australia, it's interesting to see a really significant Catholic presence.
Mm-hmm.
And that's likely tied to its history of European settlement as well.
Okay.
So you'll find entries for the Catholic Diocese of Rockhampton or the Massive Archdiocese of Melbourne.
Wow.
It makes you realize how these early waves of migration continue to shape religious landscapes today.
Yeah, so we're seeing how history, colonialism, migration, it all plays a part in where these different branches of Christianity take root.
Right.
It's not just about the religious doctrine.
Absolutely.
It's about the movement of people and cultures
Yeah,
throughout history.
exactly. And it gets even more kind of layered when you start to look at the larger structures within each branch,
Okay.
the councils and conferences that connect these dioceses.
Right, because it's not just these individual churches operating in isolation.
No, not at all. There are layers of communication and coordination happening here.
So give me an example of that.
Sure. So take the Council of the Bishops' Conferences of Europe.
Okay.
They play a role in, discussing shared challenges, promoting collaboration, and even engaging in some ecumenical dialogue
Mm-hmm.
with other Christian branches.
And there are like regional councils too, right?
Many, in fact, you've got the Federation of Asian Bishops Conferences,
Okay.
working across incredibly diverse cultures and faiths.
Wow.
And even the Latin American and Caribbean Episcopal Council,
Okay.
they face the unique challenge of coordinating across this vast region, grappling with poverty and climate change.
It makes you wonder, how do these councils actually function?
Right.
Are they truly effective in fostering that unity and collaboration? I bet there's some fascinating stories,
Oh, I'm sure.
maybe even some power struggles going on behind the scenes.
Oh,
And
definitely.
that's just the tip of the iceberg, right? We're only starting to peel back the layers here, and I have to admit, I'm starting to feel a little bit overwhelmed.
Yeah,
There are so many directions we could go from here.
sure.
Where would you start digging deeper?
Well, I think it depends what piques your interest, what's caught your eye so far.
I have to admit, I'm really curious about those Eastern Orthodox and Oriental Orthodox branches.
Okay.
I know we touched on them briefly, but I'd love to really understand their differences
Sure.
in a little more detail. And while we're on the topic of specific denominations, I'm also wondering about the Baptist communities that are mentioned in this blog. How does, say, the Southern Baptist Convention in the U.S. compare to Baptist communities in other parts of the world, like Africa or Asia?
Those are great questions, and they really highlight the just incredible depth and diversity that this blog offers.
Yeah.
Each link is like a rabbit hole leading to a whole new world of information.
I'm starting to feel like we've been handed a key to this vast library. So before we get totally lost in the stacks, let's take a step back.
Okay.
And consider what we've learned so far.
Absolutely.
We've kind of started to build a framework for understanding this world of Christian dioceses in 2024. We've seen those three main branches, explored how historical and cultural forces have shaped their distribution.
Right.
And even touched on those councils that connect dioceses on regional and continental levels.
It's a really complex and fascinating tapestry.
It is, and the blog, with its focus on union between Christians, it seems to hint at something deeper, something beyond just mapping out those divisions.
Right. It begs the question, what efforts are being made to bridge the gaps between these different branches and denominations?
And what does that even mean for the future of Christianity?
Those are questions we're going to need to explore further as we continue our deep dive.
Okay, I'm ready for it.
All right.
Let's do it.
Let's go.
Okay, so we've laid out this fascinating map of Christianity in 2024.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering, how does this all connect back to the bigger picture? I mean, why should we even care where these dioceses are and how they're structured?
Well, that's a great question, and I think that's where we move from simply mapping the territory to understanding the implications.
Okay.
You see, these religious demographics, the spread of different Christian communities, it actually influences everything from social values to political landscapes.
So it's not just about religion in a vacuum, it's about how those beliefs actually shape societies.
Yeah.
And how people interact with the world around them.
Precisely, think about those strong Anglican communities we talked about in Africa.
Right.
Their historical context, their relationship with that former colonial power, that's going to shape their priorities and their concerns in a way that might differ significantly from, say, the Catholic communities in Australia, which has their own unique story.
It's like each region is this microcosm of how history, culture, and faith intertwine.
It really is.
And understanding those nuances allows us to really interpret current events with more depth.
Yeah.
Helps us anticipate potential trends, even engage in more meaningful cross-cultural dialogues.
Absolutely.
Imagine trying to navigate international relations or global development initiatives without even considering the religious landscape.
Right.
It would be like trying to read a map without knowing the terrain.
It's true. And it's also a reminder that even within a single faith, there's this whole spectrum of beliefs and practices.
Right.
I mean, we often talk about Christianity as this monolithic thing, but this deep dive is showing us just how diverse it really is.
Which makes me think about the blog's title, Union Between Christians.
Right?
It's not just acknowledging those divisions, it's striving for something more.
Yes, it points to this underlying tension, I think, between diversity and unity within Christianity.
Okay.
So on the one hand, this tapestry of denominations and traditions, it really reflects, I think, the beauty of human interpretation and adaptation.
Okay.
It shows how faith can evolve and take root in different cultural contexts,
Right.
enriching this overall tapestry.
But as we've seen throughout history, those differences can also be a source of conflict.
Absolutely. Differences in interpretation and practices, even in leadership structures. These have led to misunderstandings, disagreements, and sometimes even outright hostility between Christian groups.
It's a sobering reminder that faith, even when it's rooted in these shared values, can become a source of division.
Yes, it can.
So that brings us back to that question of unity.
Right.
How do you bridge those divides, especially when you're dealing with such deeply held beliefs and traditions?
It's a complex challenge, and there's no easy answer. But I think this blog, with its meticulous mapping of the Christian world, it offers a starting point.
Okay.
By understanding those nuances of different branches and denominations, by acknowledging their historical and cultural contexts, we can at least start to build some bridges of understanding.
It's about moving beyond our own familiar corner of Christianity and engaging with this wider landscape.
Yes.
And that requires a healthy dose of curiosity.
Absolutely. And a willingness to learn from each other's experiences. You might find that you have more in common with a Christian from a different denomination halfway across the world than you do with someone from your own tradition who lives down the street.
That's a fascinating thought. So this blog isn't just about information.
Right.
It's about encouraging dialogue
Yeah.
and maybe even empathy between these different Christian communities.
Exactly.
And it reminds us that while these differences might exist, there are also these shared values
Yeah.
and these shared goals that can unite us.
Absolutely.
Issues like poverty, injustice, climate change, these transcend denominational boundaries.
Yes,
And they call for this collaborative action.
they do.
So you mentioned earlier that this blog could be a lens for understanding the world, but it sounds like it could also be a tool for changing it.
Indeed. And that's where critical thinking comes in.
Okay.
We can't just passively accept everything we read or assume that one perspective holds all the answers.
Right.
We need to engage with this material thoughtfully, question assumptions, consider different viewpoints, look for corroborating evidence.
Especially when we're dealing with religious topics,
Yes.
which can be so emotionally charged.
Exactly.
We don't want to fall into the trap of just reinforcing our own biases.
No, we want to use this information to expand our understanding, to challenge our preconceptions,
Right.
and ultimately engage with the world in a more informed and compassionate way.
Okay, this is a lot to digest. We've covered so much, from mapping this global Christian landscape to exploring the potential for unity and even the importance of critical thinking. I need a moment to process all of this.
Let's take a moment to gather our thoughts before we head into that final part of our deep dive.
Okay, I'm ready to see where we end up.
All right, me too.
All right, so here we are, the final stretch of our deep dive. We've journeyed from this bird's eye view of the Christian world all the way down to those really fascinating councils working across continents.
I know, it's been a lot to take in.
It has been. It's been a lot.
But that's what makes a deep dive so rewarding, right?
Yeah, you get to appreciate how complex and nuanced a topic can be.
Absolutely.
And this one feels especially relevant right now, don't you think?
I agree.
Religion, and specifically Christianity in this case, it plays such a huge role in shaping societies, impacting global events.
It's a force that connects people.
Yeah.
But as we've seen, it can also divide them. And that tension is something I think we all need to be aware of, especially as we're trying to navigate this increasingly interconnected world.
Absolutely. So as we kind of wrap up here, let's bring it back to you, the listener. What are you taking away from this exploration?
Yeah, what new insights have you gained? Have you discovered something that surprised you about the distribution of different Christian communities? Or maybe those councils that are working behind the scenes?
Or maybe this deep dive has sparked your curiosity about a specific denomination or a region you'd like to learn more about.
Right, or maybe even inspired you to get involved in some interface dialogue or bridge-building efforts in your own community.
Whatever it may be, we hope this whole journey has expanded your perspective on this world of Christianity in 2024.
Yeah, it's a reminder that even within a single faith, there's this incredible diversity of beliefs and practices.
And remember, knowledge is most valuable when it's shared
Right.
and applied. So go out there, talk about what you've learned, engage in thoughtful conversations.
Keep exploring this fascinating world of faith and belief.
Yeah, who knows what other connections you might uncover.
And if this deep dive has left you with more questions than answers, that's actually a good thing.
It means you're thinking critically, you're engaged, and there's always more to discover.
Absolutely. So keep those questions coming, keep exploring.
And thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Yes, thank you.
Until next time.